Welcome. I've got Louise O'Reilly here today. It's so wonderful, Louise, to have you join me on the Resourcewoman podcast.
It is so lovely to be here. I love having these chats with you. You know, the conversations I have with you are always so deep and so transformative. It's beyond that surface level conversation. So such a pleasure and such an honor to be here with you.
Oh, thank you. So I've got Louise on today because I've been watching Louise and also I've done a little bit of work with Louise in and around inclusivity and diversity and allyship. And she's doing some amazing work with businesses and I think people personally, because it's really impacted my personal life, working in and around inclusion. And I feel it's really important work of these times and really feel it goes really deep into the core of who we are as individuals, as well as ancestors, as well as community, as well as culture. It's just so multi-layered and faceted, this work, and it's just so crucial, I feel, at this particular time on the planet. And so inclusion and working with diversity within and in our own personal life can create powerful cultural and community change, expanding our potential and capacity in every area of our lives: business, relationships, self-love, and self-compassion. Meaning that we need to connect with our inner resources to work on being more inclusive and develop allyship. And I love talking to Louise about this as well. I know her background has been working with inclusion and being and racism as well as she's got a really amazing background as a healer too, and she does a lot of healing work. I know that she straddles both and interweaves that really beautifully in her work with what I've seen and worked with, and how she holds space. And such a loving and incredibly compassionate space that she holds for people learning about inclusivity, allyship, and diversity. And when I watch Louise's work and have seen her work, she brings a space that's non-judgmental, and it's really such a beautiful gift to give. People who are learning about this, which is quite confronting, particularly as my own background as a white woman, that unpacking that for myself is confronting and quite painful and shocking work to do. And to have Louise hold such incredible, impeccable, and beautiful space is just, we can all really learn. There's a lot of medicine in that for everybody. So wonderful to have you here. I'd like to invite Louise to do an acknowledgement to country, if that's okay with you, Louise, before we kick off with the questions.
Yes, I would absolutely love to. For those of you who don't know about acknowledgement of country, it's the first time you've ever heard of it. This is something that is accustomed to my people, the Aboriginal people of Australia. We do this to honour the custodians and the land owners in those different places that we're on. It's basically like saying, I acknowledge that I'm in your home and I thank you for allowing me and hosting me in this place. That's essentially what it is, but it's just on a much grander scale. So I, Louise O'Reilly of the Warrwa-Noongar people, would like to acknowledge and pay respects to the traditional and ongoing custodians of the lands and waters on which I'm currently on which Briony is currently on, and you as the listener or the viewer, where you are on to. I would like to really acknowledge that spiritual connection that the custodians have to that place, and acknowledge and admire and respect that custodial role that they play in that place in order for us all to survive, to us all to thrive and be safe and protected protected on multiple layers, on that physical layer, but also on that spiritual realm too. I'd also like to pay respects to the elders, the Whadjuk people, the Whadjuk elders here in this place, and also would like to pay respects to the elders on all the lands that you're on in whatever title they refer to them as in that space.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to just add just quickly, I didn't have this in, wanted to talk to you about that, but the acknowledgement to country, which was massive for me last year when I came, you know, to the gateway of your work or what you're doing in the world. When I started to work with honouring the Indigenous people and the custodians of the land in which I live on, and started to really work with honouring the elders, you know, and it was such a powerfully impactful honouring and sacred space that I created for myself and my family. And for, you know, and for my business as well, but a really personal, it just really impacted me so deeply that up until that point, it wasn't something that was really significant or taught to me as a significant honouring to do in my day-to-day or in my work anywhere, you know, really. It was sort of seen as, you know, where I live, in Northern Rivers, we have a very strong connection with the Indigenous people. And so often we have acknowledgement or welcome to country as well as part of festivals and events. Yeah. But I hadn't thought about it significantly, how it would personally I could work with that.
Yeah.
So I find it really powerful. I find it really, really powerful to work with that and for you to be, you know, introducing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the big thing. It's just there is not much of an awareness around it. So I love bringing people's awareness to the fact that they have the option to give acknowledgements of country whenever they are hosting a space where people are coming together. So that could be on your website, that could be in your emails, that could be whenever you're doing a podcast or a Facebook Live or whatever you're doing. Whenever you know there is like a formal or a semi-formal gathering of people, that's where you can give those acknowledgements of country, and everyone can give an acknowledgement of country. The beautiful thing about it is, the way I teach it is, try to steer away from those really cookie cutter type acknowledgements where you're just filling in the blank spaces and then the script is already written, because custodianship is about supporting the land and making sure the land and the spirits on those lands are cared for, protected, they're thriving, it's sustainable, they're being conserved, all those kinds of things. But that is in order for them to then care for and make sure that us as people, as humans living off that land survive, that our spirituality is safe, our souls are safe, that we have the food that we need, that everything is running in a beautiful ecosystem with each other. So the custodian's role is essentially to make sure everything on the planet is working in a beautiful harmony together. And that means every individual too. So that role of custodianship is in support of you as an individual as well. And you just have to sit back and look around at the beautiful things that you have in your spaces. If you're running your business in that space and you've got an income coming in and you're able to support your family, if you've got your home there and you're building beautiful memories in those spaces, if you have the option to go out and spend some time in nature and ground yourself and feel that amazingness that is almost, you know, undescribable when you're in those spaces, how it helps you and supports you on that spiritual level. We each individually benefit from that custodian role that they play, and we each individually can then show that acknowledgement and give thanks for that role and how it personally impacts us on an everyday basis.
Yeah, completely. And that work, you know, that incorporating that into my daily practice, incorporating and honouring the directions and honouring the Indigenous people and honouring, you know, in more like an animalism kind of approach, kind of shifted my complete perspective, the way that I've, as a spiritual woman and as a mother, and as a woman, how I was approaching my own, collaboration with spirit or with the earth and community and humanity. So I kind of felt that it really added this extra layer of support and love and consideration and just a really beautiful relationship that I was able to start to develop with the land and with the Indigenous people of the land as well, the original owners, the original custodians, I would say, of the land that I feel blessed to live on. So yeah, I find it incredible. It's just so incredibly rich every time I step in to honor, so I just wanted to say, it's just amazing. Yeah. And I love how you say to really own that, because that custodianship as well is really taking that ownership, a heartfelt ownership on how you can contribute and honor the land and its people.
And I think we even need to discuss that concept of land ownership. For Aboriginal people, it's not that we own the land. Land ownership or custodianship is that the land actually owns us. We belong to the land. We were born from it and we will return to it. That we are there to care for it. That's our birthright, to be able to care for it in ways that maybe sometimes us as humans don't do a great job at caring about our environment, or understanding how, when you do something in a certain place, how it interrupts and affects the whole ecosystem of large areas, and understanding it's pretty much like a human body. The whole earth is like a human body, and if you affect it negatively in some area, it can have a flow-on effect to other places, and sometimes it can be extremely detrimental. So understanding that when you have Aboriginal people or First Nations people who are talking about environmental protection or water protection or whatever type of protection of the environment they're speaking to, that there is this deeper understanding of how it's interconnected to everything, and how in the end it also will impact us directly as humans. So it is like a reverse understanding of what ownership is. Custodianship is I will do whatever you require of me to make sure you're safe and you're healthy, and because I do that, I will then thrive. So it's a little bit different to the Western definition of land ownership. Yeah,
definitely. And I think that kind of gets muddled a little bit as well.
Yeah,
between with white people and thinking about and land ownership as their own, as they own the right to do what they like on the land. And that's right. It's not, being a custodian is that you don't actually own the land at all.
No.
You're only there for a short period of time and you to work collaboratively together. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that, because I think, we don't ever really own anything, except for our responsibility, like the choices that we make. We are only on the earth for a very short period of time, and we are only temporary, really. So that's the same kind of concept as well. But yeah, it does really unpack all of those ideals or ideas that you're raised with, that that you own something and it's yours and you can do what you like, and it really does block that flow and that collaborative energy, that collaborative relationship together, where you're working in harmony, and you're giving back to the to the earth, to the mother, which is what I call her, and then she reciprocates by supporting you in return with the abundance of water and food, and
and that often places you in a place of self-righteousness as well. That you have a right to do certain things, and sometimes we are built in through society. We're built in with these beliefs that we have a right to have certain things or do certain things, which can sometimes push us to do things that we normally wouldn't do. And they can be quite terrible things, but that self-righteousness is behind us, backing us, going, no, well, you can, because it's your right, it's your right. So a lot what I do when I work with my clients is I talk about having spaces of neutrality, where we're neutral in these spaces, and it's to always return back to center. Does this feel right for me, my soul? Does this feel good? Does this not feel good? And really trusting your body, trusting your soul to put through those messages on what's right for you and what's wrong for you. And what's right and wrong for different people can be different. It's very subjective based on your own expression of who you are, but it's important to return back to that thing. And especially when you're talking about essentially what I do is lots of talking about social movements. We're talking about social injustices, because we do talk about racism and genderism and sexism and elitism and every other ism there is, every other social injustice or social issue we see in our world. That's inclusion comes into all of that, because if inclusion was a major value in part of us and our government or the way we run things, our society would look very, very different in terms of the way people are treated, and how people think about themselves, and the way we do everything in business, in life. So having that space of being neutral, where we can just go, I have my own autonomy of myself, of my thoughts, of my mind, of my soul. I am in sovereignty with that, and I will align with what what my soul is telling me to do. So if my soul is telling me discrimination of people based on their race or their color doesn't feel good to me, it's about aligning with what does, and changing your behavior, changing the way you speak, the way you behave and show up in the world, in order to align with what you truly believe you want to have in this world and want to create. And that in itself is changing the world. That is social change, with one person deciding to make that decision to change the way they're showing up in the world, change the way they're thinking, and taking ownership of how they're behaving, but without any expectations or self-righteousness in what they're doing. And it doesn't matter what anyone else does outside of them. It is a beautiful space to be in, and it can absolutely innovate our world into a much more inclusive one.
Yeah, completely. Yes, completely. And, you know, when you were talking about then that kind of that focused on just yourself. You used a word I can't slip my mind, pregnant mind. That
autonomy or sovereignty.
The you know, that you're just so focused on your own needs and your own you know, what you want, your ego, really. It's kind of that when you're starting to drop into and looking at inclusivity, it stops with that privilege that you just think that because you were born in a particular place, in a particular lineage, with a particular country, that you've got this self-righteous, I think that's, you know, way of living, and the privilege that comes with that. I can choose, you know, and when you're starting to look at inclusivity, it unpacks privilege, and that can be really scary. That can be really scary for people, because they feel like they're losing parts of themselves, but really they are gaining a richness and something that is so deeply that places you in a place of empowerment within, where you're not looking externally for the validation around you, but you're actually going straight into the source, into the soul, and you're actually having living your life through an embodiment experience, where you have access to incredible streams of not just consciousness, but ways of living, like joy, and like you know, even grief has a richness in it, a connectedness with other people, that us as you know, as living things need that connectedness with with other people, with community. And we've lost that as we climb the ladder of this idea, this self-righteous idea that we're owed what we're owed, and it's my privilege, and, you know, and all that kind of old dogmas that have been persisting through the generations.
And it's that whole paradigm as well of, our society has been built on masculine energy. And so when we think about that and we think about, okay, well, if I've got privilege in this particular society, these are those privileges. And if I acknowledge them and behave in a different way to, try and, I like to say innovate a new way. The way that it is at the moment is the status quo is the privilege scale. And the people who are most privileged benefit the most. The people who are least privileged almost don't benefit at all. So we can start innovating a new way of how our society works. But with that whole paradigm of privilege and thinking, well, if I give up something or if I let go of something, that means I've got lesser than because I have to give it to others. That's not how it works, because when you're talking about inclusion and community and how the whole ecosystem of us lives together in harmony, that doesn't live in a masculine space. That's the feminine space. And this is what I bring into the world. I bring in the feminine to understand it's not linear. There's not a pie and we each get a certain amount of the pie. And if more people take part of the pie, there's none left for others. It's not how it works. In the feminine energy side, it is limitless. It is abundance. There is more than enough for everyone. It never ends. So if you're looking at, well, if we change the system and I don't get as much love or respect because the privilege system goes, that means I won't be as well off. That's not the case at all. Because in the feminine energy side, where this stuff is built, where this stuff it actually lives, that means you get more love, they get more love, you get more respect, they get more respect, and we all together have more. It's this idea that there is a certain amount, which is a problem. So if we can change and flip to go, there's more than enough for everyone on this planet of everything we could ever need to thrive, to feel happiness, to feel joy, to feel that we belong, to feel accepted, then there's no worry about that. It just, we can just freely move into a different way of living.
It's the letting go of that control, that idealized way of living, and dropping into a more organic and innate and, soul approach to how we move and how we collaborate together. And at this particular time on the earth, collaboration seems to be becoming a greater divide between, particularly with the pandemic. There seems to be a greater divide with people wanting to collaborate together. And so collaboration is the revolution, connecting back through and realizing that, it's like having a bad apple. You wouldn't hold on to the bad apple just because it makes your fruit bowl. Just put it underneath and it makes
it fills it up.
It makes fruit bowl more abundant. It's still rotting and it will rot all the other apples in there. Get rid of the thing that's not working. Get rid of the apple, the rotten apple, the thing that feels chunky and feels that you can't breathe, that you can't connect with people through, or you can't collaborate, or you can't feel joy through that kind of fear and that privilege. We're kind of classified as privilege. If we move that, get rid of that, or move that off to the side and start to work with collaboration and start to work with inclusivity and start to see where our edges are and our biases are and where we've come from and how we can be more inclusive and each support each other. That bad apple, that privilege gets further and further away. It's not sometimes a matter of, when I first started on my journey, it wasn't a matter of me going, I'm going to dump everything, because that was really scary. But I can say, hey, this doesn't feel good to me. This actually doesn't feel good to me. Let's have a look at why I'm not feeling great and what I've done to contribute to this, and start looking at the edges where I haven't been inclusive. Start looking at places where we've allowed, division in the way that we speak to our children and our family and our community, where the subtle threads of that have come in. And it's simple as looking at your language, looking at the way you're moving in community, looking at your body language as well in and around certain situations. And it's not an overnight fix, but it certainly is. It's an overnight fix to commit to to working towards a more inclusive world for, you know, for everybody.
Absolutely. And there are two things that came up for me when you started saying all that. Firstly, I want to address that privilege is not a bad thing. So if you are privileged, if you're highly privileged, that doesn't equate to you being bad or wrong or entitled or anything, any bad term you can think of. It does not equate to that. What privilege, it's an indicator to show you that you have the capacity in our society, the way it's built, to receive more benefits, or when certain things are built, certain systems are built, certain businesses are built, you are in mind to have your needs met, and often beyond what your needs are met. But there are others who don't have their needs met when these things are being dreamed of and imagined and being brought into creation, and they can severely either suffer from those particular things not being part of that conversation, not being included in those thought processes, in those conversations, of those planning or anything like that. So it's not, if you're privileged, it's not bad. But what you can do with privilege, you are very privileged to have privilege, because you can then look at where you are mostly privileged, and you can do what I call, you can harness your privilege to bring awareness to the lack of inclusion. You can harness it to speak up, because in those spaces where you are more privileged, your voice, your words, and your actions hold more power in those spaces than they do for other people. Start to listen to people who are marginalized, who aren't included, listen to their stories and go, I can use my privilege to provide a platform for these voices to come through. You can either start talking about the conversation about, let's talk about, people we aren't including in this space, and let's see how we can innovate it in a way or dream up a different way to make it better. But also you can actually say, because I am privileged and I'm here and you're listening to me, I want to now hand the mic over for you to listen to this person and what they have to say on this particular thing, because they have a different world experience than I do, and I can't speak to that. And I think it's important to listen to it in this particular space. So other than that, knowing your privilege is a very powerful, powerful thing you can do in this time and age. But then on the flip side of that, you were talking a little bit about the fruit bowl and having that apple and throwing it away. Lots of people are really scared with the concept of changing something, because even though it feels uncomfortable and we don't really like it, the thought of doing anything that is outside what we've always done, or moving to that uncertainty or that unknown, what would that world look like, seems really scary. So what I'd like to do with lots of my clients is, let's actually create a vision. What things do you value? What do you actually want the world to look like? And we spend a lot of time in imagining what that could be. Imagine a world that was, where everyone accepted everyone, where the sameness was celebrated, where the differences were celebrated. And in all these spaces, it wasn't an issue on if you looked different or if you identified different. Everyone was just accepted, and we could all just get along, and we can create beautiful things together. What is it? What would that world look like if you could wake up and not feel the pressure of society wanting you to be something you're not, or making you conform in some kind of way, or saying that however you identify or whatever group you're in, you must be this particular trait, or you are, this type of person. What if we had a world where that didn't exist? What would that look like? How would that feel like? And then it's like, in your mind, once you've created that world and how beautiful that would feel, it's a little bit less scary, because then you start to go, I want to be in that world, and not necessarily in this current world. So what can I do to move forward and start making that world a reality? And so it's not like you're grabbing something and scrunching it up and chucking it away. It's we're going, look, we've seen what has happened in the past. We know where we are today and the effects of what that has done. And we totally acknowledge that. But now with that and holding that, we can look to the future at what we want to create and go, how can I mold what we have right now into something better every single day?
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you're saying. And that brings up, I've got a few questions here, and it sort of feeds into a couple of those questions actually. And I want to touch on that, that firstly, and it wasn't the question I was going to begin with, but I'm going to go to it straight away. Like that scrunching up, like as I said about the apple, throwing it away, it made me, I kind of thought, well, it's about, if I look into the way we kind of dismiss or we cut off from our ancestors. And I'm not saying everybody, I'm just saying that there's a bulk of the, community, particularly probably white people, who don't have a connection with their ancestors or don't have any ancestral rituals. And we tend to focus on only the good stories, the good people that have passed, the good things that they've done. And we don't, and we glorify their life like it's some kind of really big, amazing, Bible story, if you want to, but in actual fact, when we're starting to work with, because a lot of the inclusivity and the diversity issues have come through the generations. It's a learnt pattern.
Yes.
And so when we start to reclaim our ancestral lineage of where we've come from, of whatever country you're settled on and how your ancestors were to be on country, we tend to just pick the good bits and discard the rest.
Yeah.
But a lot of the work that I do, particularly with going within and finding resources within and the soul work and even what you talked about too, Louise, about envisioning a new world, what it would look like, that requires you actually taking all of your ancestors' stuff and integrating it, taking all the stories, all the not so great bits, all the not so great characters, and integrating and learning to walk with the reality of where you've come from, where you live, who you are, how that all plays in, and unpacking all of that. So how would you speak to that?
Well, I love the fact that you know how important it is to connect to ancestors and to your culture, where you came from, and not just taking the good stuff, but it's sometimes the not so good stuff too. So when I talk to my clients, or if I'm running workshops or whatever I'm doing, I don't want people to hold shame or guilt or blame on themselves because of things that have happened in the past, things that they have no control over. What we talk about is, let's look at them, let's acknowledge they've happened, let's make commitments to ourselves to make sure those actions and those behaviors don't ever surface again through us. It's like it stops at us. We're not going to do that anymore. So if you aren't acknowledging some of those bad things, you can't break that chain. And a lot of us who are doing that internal work, who are looking at these kinds of things, that's part of the things to break the chain of the not so good stuff that is happening and has been passed down from generation to generation. So until we have that awareness of what that is, we can't actually address it. We can't transmute it. We can't release it. We can't reframe it. We can't do anything with it. So it's a very empowering process to know all the parts of us. And it's very important to also know our stories that make up us along the way from our ancestors, because they are always going to be part of us. Their story makes up part of our story. And if you don't know their stories, the lives they've lived and the things they have gone through, it doesn't help you fulfill your lifetime. I mean, for instance, I can look back on my family and see where there's been massive injustice in terms of the way that they have been treated in this particular country lawfully mistreated in this country. And so with that forms a part of me that, and scientifically we know now that there is intergenerational trauma that is handed down from generation to generation. So I hold part of that in me. And especially seen as occupation in Australia of, first settlement is only a couple of generations really, when you think about it. So that's very prevalent, all the trauma that has happened in me. So when you start addressing those things, you can start making it better for your children and for your families and for your lineage that go on from you, because you start to go, no, this is not happening anymore. I'm addressing this particular thing. But also the beauty of acknowledging your own heritage, ancestry, and culture is that means there is a tendency for not appropriating other cultures as well. And what I've seen over and over is this real, and it is a beautiful thing. There is a massive appreciation for different cultures. And because there is this appreciation and love, and it produces some kind of beautiful feeling or transformation within you, sometimes people have gone, well, I'm going to take that thing and go and share that too, because that's a beautiful thing to have in the world. And they take what belongs to another person's culture and go and profit from it, or go and use it in a way that it shouldn't be intended by people who shouldn't be using it. But when you understand how rich and deep your own ancestry is and own culture, because everyone has it, you can start to bring those rituals into the way you were showing up. You can start bringing those beautiful feelings and the ways of healing and whatever work you do from your own ancestry. And how amazing would that be to completely honor your ancestors, your heritage, what makes up you? I just think, wow, how beautiful would that be if we knew that?
Definitely. Yeah. It's an idealized way, isn't it? It's an idealized way. It's kind of like, and I've been unpacking this a little bit as well with thinking about my own culture and where I've come from and how I've rejected my own ancestors, and reclaiming those ancestors and building, bringing the stories through. But it's like an idealized, like a programming that we're kind of set to look out and see somebody else as having more again than what we have. It's like that external validation, that external kind of grasping that stops inclusivity. That person looks happier, that person's got more of that, or that person's got a richer heritage, or and so it's like this programming that we're, this idealized way of living that's kind of, again, in that patriarchal construct that tells us that we've got to have it all compartmentalized and we've got to have it all outside of ourselves in order to feel fulfilled inside ourselves, when it's actually the other way around. I kind of see that this work that you're doing, inclusivity and allyship, is really the necessary self-growth work of these times. So I touched on that earlier. And I would love to hear what you think about, in a personal way, for anyone listening, or to begin with that work within themselves, because I believe it begins with yourself and ripples out. Where do you think it begins with for the person when they're starting to work with inclusivity?
When they're starting, look, the very first thing that I always talk about is definitely the inner work. So people want to be inclusive and they want to do lots of action. So it's got to be a process. And something in my Noongar culture is we have 6 seasons in this place, but the 6 seasons don't just represent our seasons. The 6 seasons are also the process of doing anything in our lifetime, that there has to go through, a space of conception and then an incubation, and then a birthing, and then a childhood, and then an adult, and then an adolescent. So, the other way around for the last 2, adolescent, then adult, and then a death. And our death doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, but death is like completion. So what I have found with lots of my clients is they try to skip the first part. They try to skip the understanding what your values are. They try and skip what is the vision of what you want to be creating? What's important to you in terms of socially, what's important to you? What is something that you think in the world they're just absolutely, you have no tolerance for? Is that racism? Is that genderism? What is that? And because we are all here to care for everything. We're here to care for everything. That's part of one of our Noongar Dreamtime stories, the first Dreamtime story, that we are the carers of everything. But that doesn't mean us as individuals need to care for everything. So it's important for us to know we have a role to play. And if each of us perform and play out our role and fulfill our role, which we're born to do, everything is taken care of. And this is why we have like totem systems in our culture, because our totem is the thing that we care for. That's what we're responsible for caring for. And so when you can understand what you're here for, and you know, you can do your meditations and the inner work, and it will tell you what's important to you. It's this thing that no matter what, it's like a fire inside of you. This is how I feel it. It's like a fire, and it doesn't matter what's happening around the rest of the world. Until that thing is resolved, I'm not going to stop thinking about it. I'm not going to stop talking about it. And I'm not going to stop trying to do the things that I can do in my power to make it different. And us in business, we created businesses to change something in the world because we weren't satisfied with what was on offer. And we knew we had some kind of medicine to fix that thing. It is the same concept. We need to understand those things. Also, when you start understanding that, and then you also assess your privilege and look at the spaces where you hold more influence and power, you can combine each of those things and then know what is the most meaningful, impactful actions and behaviors and whatever it is that you can take to start creating that change in your worlds. Too often I see people who are very multi-passionate or lots of different social issues in the world, and they spread themselves so thinly among them that their energy makes no change. It's too thin, it just can't do anything. But when you know there is something in particular, you're like, I'm going to dedicate my energy to this particular thing. And then you can start building that momentum. This is when, you know, social movements happen. This is when the groundswell happens. This is when people come and join you in this thing, because there is beautiful energy building to creating and innovating something better for people. And then when you sit in that feminine energy rather than the masculine energy is a very siloed way. So if I only help or support this particular cause, that's the only thing that seems to be meaningful. It's not the case. It doesn't mean anything else is less meaningful or important. It means that's what you're doing. When you're sitting in the feminine space, you understand when you raise the standard of the way people are treated in any space, you raise the standards in every other social movement. It's all interconnected. It's all about how we socially interact with other people. So anytime something is better in one particular social movement, it helps raise every other one. So it's not neglecting others. It is being really smart with your own energy and focusing it in a way that actually moves the needle of the status quo, that actually makes the real change.
That's beautiful, because as you're describing that, I can see, you know, there's so many you know, there's a lot about ageism at the moment. There's a lot about transphobia. There's a lot of minority groups, just to name, you know, two areas there that are, you know, that are really, you know, emerging. There's a lot in the, you know, globally right now that we're seeing. And it's interesting that you say that change in one of those groups impacts all the others. Because I did notice that. I thought, wow, it's interesting that we have this emerging anti-racism movement globally, and then all these other minority groups now are coming up and having a voice, and you can see it, you know, more probably on social media, and calling for inclusivity, calling for, you know, for acceptance, for love, for inclusivity is probably the best word to use. So it's really interesting that you say that. Yeah, that's really amazing. Yeah, it kind of excites me actually. It excites me actually. Yeah, it feels really nice. When we talk about, inclusivity, when you talk about inclusivity, it's including everything, bringing everything into the one space together. And I love how you spoke about celebrating sameness and celebrating difference as well. And I really liken that also to the ancestral work as well. When you bring the story through, the real stories, and you start to get into the juicy bits, which are not they often are not the nice bits, but there's also a celebration I can feel in the ancestral world, that ancestor that's passed is saying, thank goodness my life and what I've done is contributing some way to the change that is possible, now, really. Mm-hmm. And so there's like a celebratory kind of, my life counts for something, even if it was a really crappy life, if they did some really bad things, to bring that through and to go and to alchemize that and make that as medicine or that inclusivity as well. So can you talk to me, because I see inclusivity when we're like with the when we've got divisions within ourselves, mm-hmm. and fear and places that we've segmented, that we find, the inclusivity can be really tricky to cultivate. Mm-hmm. So, dividing all, how do we bring all that, so we're feeling more inclusive with all parts of ourselves, within ourselves, and then start to bring that out into the world? Because I feel from my experience, that's where the work for me began, is retrieving all those parts that I kind of cut away, or that weren't fitting into that idealized way of living, or that, just to fit into this. So how do we bring it all together within, so we can start to create that around us?
Well, definitely bringing that awareness by assessing that privilege, looking at what we want to be creating, all that stuff I had already mentioned, that's certainly part of it. But I completely understand sometimes you can get stuck. Like, you can find something about yourself that you just go, I don't like that. I don't feel good about it. I don't want to accept it. There's a real resistance to it. And that, you probably can hear my chooks start now. They want to have something to say too. The thing is, that is the social conditioning we've had to believe that is not acceptable, or that's not okay within us. So a technique that I like to use when I get into those particular spaces, or my clients do, is let's then go at it as if we are a baby. Mm-hmm. How would a baby feel about this particular thing? Would this baby be like, oh, no, I don't want to, I'm a bit too chubby, or, I can't quite walk yet, so I'm not that great. The baby's not going to do that. The baby's just love. The baby's just, inquisitive and playful and happy. And they're okay with shouting what their needs are. And they're okay with demanding attention. They're okay with knowing they are completely worthy of everything they desire. So that is a really great technique to go, well, I sometimes look at myself as baby Louise. So I'll go, if I were to hold baby Louise, will I ever say, you're not pretty enough, or you're too fat, or you're too skinny, or your skin is the wrong color, or whatever it is that we're not accepting about ourselves? Would I ever say that to baby Louise? And the answer is absolutely no. And if it's not okay for us to say to a baby, why is it okay for us to say it to ourselves now? The internal dialogue we have is so unbelievably critical and harsh. If we can start training ourselves to go, would I ever say this to a child? If not, it's not okay to say to me. Would I ever say this to a friend? If not, it's not okay to say to me. But also understand that we are not what we have been. We are not our actions. And just to know that the only power we have is in this moment. Right now is where our power is at. And right now, you might just be a person sitting down on your couch listening to this, or you might be driving in the car. This is the whole of what is in existence right in this moment. So in this moment, you can make choices for what you want to create, how you want to show up, how you want to behave, how you want to be seen. It's always in this moment. We can't change anything that has been. We can only change this. But a choice we can also make too is to not accept negative stereotypes about others or about ourselves, not accept that what someone else says is. One concept that comes to my mind, which is quite general, is this concept of in business, you need to look professional. And then ask yourself, first of all, what does professional even mean? Secondly, who got to decide that thing? Who do we answer to? Why do I need to do what that person or that group of people say I have to do or have to be? And so really get yourself questioning these, social norms or these ideals of how a certain type of person should be. If you identify as a woman, that doesn't mean you have to be feminine. If you identify as a man, that doesn't mean you have to be masculine. Let's just be us. Because the world wants us. Really, really does. And, if we are sitting there going, I'm going to conform and try and mold myself into what society wants me to be, we are never going to be happy. We are never going to be fulfilled, and we are never going to reach our potential.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah. As a mum and a woman, how do you move with this with your family? If there's any women, most of my listeners are women, of course, but some, I know that some women get frustrated with feeling like they're kind of hitting a brick wall, with partners or in their community or their family, and kids are being fed, two very different lots of different ideologies, I suppose, still about what inclusivity is, or, just old dogmas. Yeah. What would you, as a mum and as a woman, how, what would you suggest to a woman that's listening? How have you integrated into your family? I'd love you to expand on that.
Yeah, it is. Look, it is absolutely a journey, and it's a journey that I will continue being on for the rest of my life. But something that I've found that has really worked was just knowing within myself that I am this unique, beautiful soul, and my unique, beautiful soul is here for a reason. I belong here because I exist. That is the indication that I belong, and I don't require any other external validation for my belonging or my worthiness or anything like that. So it's every day practicing that belief that I am enough, and I do not answer to anyone. I do not, my worthiness and who I am and how I behave is not part of someone's checklist of what I should and shouldn't do. So I think that in part is a very important thing, to just have that within yourself, because that also reflects out subconsciously into your family systems as well. But, we can't take our children away from society and stop every toxic thought or belief system coming to them. They're going to get it, because we live in a community where there is diversity, and where we have been taught to live in that fear of you must behave a certain way, otherwise you won't be accepted, you won't belong. And we're social. We need to be social with each other, so that even just the thought of not being accepted can push us into becoming something we're not. So I think it's important to really make sure you're open with your children to talking about different concepts and different topics. And so you are giving them another option. It's not just one way. So, if they're being told, if you're a boy or you're a girl or you're whatever, you have to be this particular thing. And I'm not going to say non-binary, because non-binary doesn't even exist in most of the school systems. So it's like you're told one or the other. If you're having conversations, well, actually there is more. And just because you're a boy doesn't mean you have to feel this way or do this thing or look this way. And just because you're a girl, it doesn't mean this. You get to do whatever makes you happy. So one thing that I do with my kids is I always talk about them feeling within their body. How does that feel in your body? Like, does it feel like a nice feeling in your body or not nice feeling? And to just really start to learn that the messaging that they get through their body is the one that's right or wrong for them. And it doesn't matter what their teacher says, what, you know, police say, what anyone else, what parents say, for them to know within themselves that they have the right messages of what's right for them, and then to really trust that intuition and be able to move forward with that. I think if you give them a bigger spectrum of what's possible or what exists, rather than one or two categories, and open up the possibility that it's actually everything's a spectrum. Nothing's just a singular thing, or there's no just two boxes to tick. Then that gives them the option to know, I don't have to do that thing. I can if I choose, but I don't have to. There is more on option for me. So I think they're probably the biggest things, and always being open. Like if something happens in school, well, let's sit down, let's chat through that. Let's talk about this, and just being really supportive that your kids might not want to be the way society wants them to be. And for them to know that no matter what, you are going to love them and accept them. And they are always going to belong in your family, no matter what anyone else says.
That's beautiful, Louise. That's so beautiful. As it's teaching them how to access their resources within, to say that you get what you need within you when you connect with the body, which is an incredible portal into really understanding who you are and how you feel, and all the things that we've been talking about, inclusivity, and bringing all of you into the moment, you know, even your emotions, and honoring who you are, so you can honor the differences and the sameness in others. That's beautiful. Yeah, that's so beautiful. So beautiful. One other question before we kind of wrap it up, because I could talk to you for longer. I do love sitting, and listening and talking with you. What do you think is the biggest, the biggest cultural shift in Australia happening right now? And I want to talk about Australia. I know this really links into Globe, so I'm happy for you to touch on that as well. But I don't feel the Indigenous voice in Australia is really still being heard. I mean, I'm quite frustrated on the sidelines here, watching it. But what do you think is the biggest shift that Australia needs to make, and what do you see is the biggest shift that Australia has made, if any, in creating more allyship, inclusivity, and working with a diversity, particularly with the Indigenous people of Australia?
Oh, that is a big question. That is a big question. I would encourage people to seek out, Aboriginal voices, your local Aboriginal voices, people who are there, who are willing and wanting to be public to talk about some of the things they're going through, to just listen. And I don't mean listen as in terms of, okay, well, let's come up with a solution to this particular thing. I mean, listen to them, embrace them, think about, what they're going through, the experiences that they're having, and really think about how you might be contributing to that continued depression or pain in some way and altering that. So it's what we call here deep listening, and in the Noongar language is Dani. So Dani is your tongue is listening. And it's really that being okay with the silence, being okay with not having answers, but just taking that in and feeling it as an equal person. I'm looking at a person in my community, a member of the Globe, who is feeling and experiencing this society that I'm part of, that I have a vote in, that I have a say in, they're feeling this way and I'm not okay with that, or I am okay with that, whatever it is for you. But sitting with that, contemplating that, one big thing that will probably help shift the way we do things here in Australia is to have an enshrined voice to Parliament. One major problem we have as part of the way our governmental system is built is that the government can create laws and policies that affect minority groups. Aboriginal people are one of those minority groups. The thing is, you have Aboriginal people occupying 3% of the nation, approximately 3% of the nation. And yet you have 97% of people who can vote on things that directly affect only 3% of the nation without having any understanding or education of how that actually impacts that particular community, how culturally appropriate or inappropriate it is for that community. So even with good intentions, people can vote for things that can have massive and dire consequences to marginalised people like Aboriginal people. So if there was some way that our government can have a voice there that can advise on how these things could impact those particular communities, that particular advice can then be shared out into the community, and then people can vote in a more educated way. They can vote in a way that aligns better with their belief systems. It's not about taking power away. It's not about giving more power to anyone, because this voice will essentially be, it won't have any power in Parliament. It's not like a third chamber of Parliament or anything like that. It's simply a way of understanding how certain policies will affect that particular community. I think that is the way to go in order just to connect. Just to connect, to be able to understand better the culture and how things, because things work very, very differently, Western culture to Aboriginal culture. And even though we Aboriginal people live in both worlds, our commitment is to our culture overall, and our spirituality and who we are is linked in with the culture and linked in with the land. So that's the number one that overrides any other thing. So I think that would be a way forward. Absolutely, to have that, just so there is, like I said, a deeper connection or a bit of an understanding of how the actions we take and the decisions we take in our country impact minority groups. And I think with that, it will also ripple out to other minorities in us questioning and understanding, oh, well, if this is happening in this way to this particular minority group, how is this impacting this other minority group? So it just opens up that questioning. And then what we can do is we can start opening up inclusive conversations about, okay, this is where we are at the moment. Obviously, it's not working for this minority group. Let's have those people who are experiencing that thing firsthand come in and be part of the solution, be part of that conversation. I'm a true believer that the people who are closest to the solution are the people who are closest to the problem. And the people who are closest to the problem are the people who are experiencing it firsthand. So that's kind of where I think the future will go. Who knows what that model will look like? But I think it's certainly needed. It's time.
Yeah, I agree. And that's my vision for Australia too. That I feel there needs to be representation of the Indigenous community in Australia in Parliament. Most definitely. There needs to be seats. I love seats that could represent the community and the needs of the community in governing the country. Most definitely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. Is there anything, final question, is there anything that people could do right now and, listening right now that they could start? I'm going to link all your how people can contact you and look at your work with the podcast. But yeah, if anyone listening right now, where can they start just in their next step?
Okay. Well, you know what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to offer them 2 free resources, downloadable resources that they can use. And one of them will be how to actually assess their privilege. Assess their privilege. So you can start looking at where are the places where you have more influence, where your voice and what you say or how you act or behave has more influence and power in those spaces. So there is that. It's just a really good exercise to do, just to have that understanding. But also there is another one, which I have 50 journal prompts, which can help you bring out unconscious biases. So these are things, and it is a very spiritual kind of practice where it's not a logical thing. This is what I think about this. It's more about, okay, let's tune in and now let's work with our breath to just allow what comes through to come through. This is not a process you have to share with anyone. So you might write the most terrible things in this journal process, but that's okay, because we know it's not you. We know it's the social conditioning making you believe something about a certain group of people. You can go through that journal prompt process, and that will uncover a lot of things that you can start to then question. At the bottom of that particular journal prompts, there are also questions that you can then ask yourself afterwards. And that is this real? Is this real as in, is it just something just made up, or is it real? Is it true as in, is it true for me in my own experience? And do I want to keep it? Is this actually me? Is this something I believe in? Do you want to reframe it? Do you want to just release it? Do you want to transmute it? What do you want to do with it? And then you can decide for yourself what is the true, real thing for you that aligns with you and your soul.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I'll put all the links then on the podcast here, on underneath, and on my website as well, and on the platform, the Anchor platform, where I host the website, the podcast episodes as well, with those 2 free resources. That's so generous of you, Louise. Thank you so much. It's amazing.
You are most welcome.
It's amazing. I've loved having a conversation today.
Me too.
I just feel so juiced up, actually, and there's so much to unpack, and there's so much hope and vision that I can see when I'm talking to you today, and with what you're putting out in the world. And it's really lovely to share this space with you and bring this work and collaborate with you like this, because I really feel it's such important work individually, for community, and for your business as well, because I know you work a lot in the business area too, and being more inclusive in business in these times is just, I think it's a non-negotiable in business, as a fundamental foundational block in building a business and running a business, is to have inclusivity. But the work really does start with you and how you're moving with that in the world, and it fits into every area, forms a foundation of every area of your life. So your time is just so generous, and your knowledge and sharing your experiences and the tools and things today in today's talk has been really so much gratitude. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much. I have enjoyed every single second of it. I love having these conversations with you. And, I love the work that you do. And, I really hope that your listeners have taken some really beautiful pieces, beautiful gems away from this, and can then start to be more inclusive of themselves. Not only that, but then how it ripples out into our communities. We really can change the world. Absolutely, we can. And it just has to be that decision within ourselves of being who we are authentically, without any external thought or idea or concept trying to control or change that.
Beautiful. Thank you, Louise.